compose myself. I like it sometimes when Nick leaves little bits on extra afterwards. There's me babbling away. Hey, this is Stu, and of course I'm at the beautiful Purple Valley, and I'm double excited this time because it's the start of a new season, and I'm here with Joey Miles again, so from England, and fantastic, we're getting such good reports, everybody loves him, so it's like there's a real high going on at the moment. So today we thought we'd talk a little bit about what it is to be a beginner in Ashtanga, because it can seem a little bit daunting at the beginning, this whole sort of new world. So we thought there's lots of things that we could talk about around about those sorts of subjects. So that's what this is going to be, a little bit of themed interview around about looking at sort of beginnerish type topics. But of course they relate also to everybody. So is there anywhere you want to start, Joey? I'm going to just throw you in at the deep end without even a question.
Yeah, well, the first place I'd like to start is thinking about the attitude with which we approach the practice.
Yeah.
Okay. So we all come from a place where well, not all, but most of us come through a place where we've come through formal education. We've probably done certain sports, things like this. So the very first thing to say is Ashtanga Yoga, or yoga in general, no matter what style it is, it's not a competitive practice. It should go without saying, but it has to be checked, because most of us, we come in and we sort of see everybody else in the room, and it's quite natural from part of our conditioning to sort of place yourself, in a pecking order. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, he's stronger than me, or she's suppler, or whatever it is. So we have to acknowledge that. It's like acknowledging the shadow, and try to do something that's going to counter it. So we need to slightly shift the mental aspect with how we approach the practice. And like I say, it being non-competitive is the first sort of very obvious statement. Then we have to notice what are the physiological signs that actually you're acting in a way that's either competitive or aggressive. Okay.
So how would you view that? Pushing too much?
Yeah, overly pushing. That's the main thing. I mean, I'm still now, 17 years into regular practice, constantly trying to tell myself, okay, today's intention, let's not overly push. That doesn't mean you hang out in this completely kind of, floppy way in the pose. There's something to be done. But at the same time, we mustn't overly strive, overly push, or get overly aggressive. What I'm always telling students, especially in these afternoon classes we do, is the signs for overly pushing, they're very obvious. The jaw clenches, we get aggressive, the brow furrows. You just start to... And of course, also, as we listen to the sound of the breath instantly tells us. It becomes
more harsh, doesn't it?
I often share the analogy of, like, if I were listening, if all our family are together at Christmas and maybe, it hasn't gone so well, and then there's the washing up of the dishes, it's like, it all gets a little bit slammed and a bit tense. The closing of the door is a bit of a slam. It's not calm. So the breath, to me, in my mind, it's just like the conversation and the tone, the voice of a loved one. You can instantly tell when you listen to your breath. If you're actually listening, you can tell whether or not there's an edginess there, a pushing there. And when there is, you just have to remind yourself, hang on, where am I trying to get to?
Yeah.
And this simple question, where am I trying to get to, is actually it's really important to address. Now, many of us have goals for the practice, and as a beginner, we might want to. We have all sorts of different reasons to practice, and of course we need to acknowledge those. But actually, we really need to acknowledge that basically we're perfect as we are. Like right now, we're perfect in whatever state that is, even though that's really not how we're normally framing things, because culture and society tells us we're not perfect.
Yeah.
I mean,
except our mums. They normally tell us we're so special.
Exactly. Other than our mums and our kids when they're at a young age, and then even they get a bit older and tell us we're crap. I mean, we were joking just before the filming. Oh, could you give us a bit of an extra tan, and could you, cut the stubble off? Could we have the CGI thing? Could you bring in the wires for when I do my next demonstration? So there's that quality that culture tells us. You're overweight, you need to be better, you need to somehow, sort this, that, other, get your highlights done. It's like all of that stuff we're constantly being told by advertising in a kind of capitalist culture that you need to somehow change, that you need to be different. And actually, if we bring that mindset to Ashtanga practice, I need to complete the series, I must bind, it can become a stick to beat you with.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, for somebody who's a beginner, who's a little stiff, they get the delight and the benefit of the twist. Just, that's enough. Does it matter if the arms are looped and binding? Yeah. Generally, it doesn't really matter. You get that delicious sense of physical release, and with it, the emotional and mental release from doing something so simple. So looking and checking this attitude and reverting back to what I would regard as simplicity and ease is
Yeah.
perhaps the kind of cornerstones of the practice.
There's some people as well, like you start with that enthusiasm. It's very, so we meet several different things, don't we? The real enthusiasm of beginning, and then we can, after a month or 2 months, reach a little bit of a plateau, and then that's the first challenge, isn't it? To keep that regularity going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this sense of committing to regularity, I do think that's vital. Having said that it's vital to be regular and committed, I think, again, it's like if you don't practice, you don't need to beat yourself up about it. So actually, I can't remember the different person I'm thinking of the quote, but it's this thing of like, actually, there is a kind of storehouse of good deeds, as it were. And actually, no practice is ever lost. No effort is ever wasted. No positive good action doesn't have its result later. So even though sometimes, you might use the expression like falling off the wagon and people take a few days off, or they get maybe a little injured or whatever it is, or they just lose their enthusiasm, or like at the moment with recent political events, some people are hanging their head in, utter sort of shock and rage or sorrow or whatever it is. Actually, this renewed sense of actually just begin again, and that's a really vital aspect.
And do you think, I mean, at the beginning, if you do only practice twice a week, although it needs to fit within your work commitments, your life commitments and everything, it's a lot harder, isn't it, to keep it rolling? As much as you say that there's no pressure, that commitment, and we think of the Ashtanga 6 days a week.
There is a learning curve, I think, not just with Ashtanga, but with anything. I mean, I do certain things like playing musical instruments, and I've tried to learn French as a foreign language, and there are certain activities. It's like there's a learning curve, and there's a sort of way, until you're over the crest of an initial wave of learning, be it the language, be it the musical instrument, or be it the Ashtanga practice, you're always going to be going uphill, basically. Yeah. And there is a point where actually, you want to coast for a while, and or you want to experience that lyrical quality. And that lyrical quality, I mean, there's a kind of effortlessness, So within practice, I think that really comes more with regularity of practice. And I think also, again, this approach, it's like, I mean, you must get it as a body worker. People come to you, I've hurt my shoulder, they want to get fixed. But actually, it's like you don't wait to go. Well, hopefully, you don't wait to go to the dentist. I mean, many of us do, but hopefully, you don't wait until it's like. So actually, we just brush our teeth twice a day. And actually, with the Ashtanga practice, or with going for body work or healthcare or whatever it is, hopefully, you go for those kind of maintenance checkups. But it's weird, this relationship we have. Like, and I know in the UK, it's like, nobody bats an eyelid of paying quite a lot of money to take the car, to get it serviced, to get it MOT every year. And maybe on top of that, they get, whatever else it is, the car checked up and clean. Yeah, exactly. And yet actually, I think it's partly because the NHS, we kind of think healthcare should be free. It's like, but hang on, what do I have to do to maintain it? Yet actually, we do need, for our own psychological well-being, for our own sense of connection, and I think that's connection to ourselves. I think that's connection to community and other people around us. I think that's also connection to the kind of felt living environment, the natural world. I think having a practice, having a daily practice, or certainly a practice that's regularly bringing us back in contact with the elements in that way, and to that quiet space inside. I mean, it's such an honour to be able to actually have the resources and the time, and the inclination. I think it's more than anything, the inclination to actually spend that time looking inward.
And also to give yourself that time out of the hectic world.
Yeah, exactly. So to use that analogy again, I know many of my sort of family members, Lord love them, if I said if I said, I was going to see you, for bodywork twice this week, they would definitely think that's quite self-indulgent.
Yes.
And yet I just regard that as something that I need to do to maintain my kind of working life.
It's your God-given right. And everybody, if you're listening, go and have some therapy at least once a week. It's your privilege.
But it does change everything. And there's that sense of actually, I mean, I know it's tacky to say, like, what was that Pantene commercial or whatever it was, I'm worth it. But it's like, but actually, it's like, we're worth it. To have the space for ourselves to do that is immense, and I think, be that the 30-minute practice or the hour and a half practice, 2 hour practice, it's like actually that really does nourish us.
And that's quite interesting. You mentioned the different times there, because some people say, well, I haven't got time to put aside an hour and a half every day. I can fit it in twice a week. But it has value, as you said, just doing 20 minutes, half an hour, or whatever you can do.
Yeah. When it comes to postural practice or meditation practice, people are always saying, well, I don't have time. But really, I think the underlying, this might come across as very rude for some people, but what I really hear when people say that is they're just not that interested.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if you're committed and you're interested to looking inward and actually to making positive change, starting, you know, from this body, because I frame the reality as I see it. You know, I frame the perception. So if I start from here, from this vessel, as it were, this, you know, this is my address. You know, it's like if I start from there to try and cleanse the perception through practice, through meditation, through stillness, through actually moving the body and investigating what I am as a human being, then that changes everything. Now, I know some people don't have the time, or they say they don't have the time, but really it's, do they have the inclination, and do they make the commitment to doing that?
Yeah. I mean, this is, of course, a huge question, so we'll trace it as much as you want. As a beginner that's embarking on Ashtanga, what is it that they, you know, the practice is many different things to many different people.
Sure.
Is there any problem in viewing it purely as a physical endeavor when you're starting?
No, I don't think there's any problem in that at all. I think if you begin wanting to do a workout, a physical workout, to get fit, to get flexible, to have that purely as a goal in mind. And I think on the surface level of my awareness, when I first started practice, I wanted to get fit, I wanted to get strong, I wanted to be flexible. At the time I did a lot of acting and performing, so I wanted to have sort of good stage presence and being able to actually, you know, use the body. Those were my goals in the beginning. I think I did also have an underlying real interest in, you know, the spirituality, the metaphysical, beyond what we see, the space, so to speak. But actually, my first goals were definitely that. That's how I framed it. And that's certainly in talking, in dialogue with people, that was why I was saying why I did yoga. I was definitely saying, yeah, well, I just want to get, you know, that was my comfort zone of saying that when I was a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
And I certainly know many other senior teachers, many other practitioners who say that's their starting goal. My belief is anybody who sticks at the practice, it will change, because you can't separate as you start to become aware of witness consciousness and actually just viewing what's going on in the mind and in the emotions and in the whole being, so to speak. You can't separate the body from the psychology. You can't separate the emotional states from what's happening physically. You realise that they're so intertwined in this kind of, in a network of your being, and that to me becomes so fascinating, and I think to everybody it becomes fascinating. One of the things I've done here, this retreat, is I give everyone a journal to write down and reflect what's going on in. And I've got these journals from years ago from practice where I look in, and my motivation for practice, it changes. You know, so my motivation for practicing when I was 17 was not the same when I was 21, and it's not the same now I'm 35.
And you still have them from 17?
Yeah, I still have them from years ago.
What sort of things does it say?
It says really like naff things like it's a bit stupid, you know, but it'll record the day and the date when, you know, I finished second series, or the day and the date when I started third series, or I've got my first practice when I was in Mysore with Guruji, and I wrote down something about being so sort of in awe and being scared of just the atmosphere, and I felt that pressure, and I think I even wrote down, I was so nervous I skipped 3 or 4 poses because I was just kind of going in a hurry and was all flustered. Little things like that, or you know, all sorts of daft things. But yeah, like I say, the motivation for practice changes. But I think the beginning motivation, I don't think it really matters what it is. Once you're there doing it, and once you see some positive results, and that's the thing. Physically, what's great is you will see positive results pretty quickly. You feel the body opening up. The thing is you do hit a plateau physically, I think, after regular practice, after a few years, or it might be 2 years, it might be 5 years, you know. And when you hit that plateau, like I've hit that plateau where I don't seem to be able to physically go further, and yet I still practice. And this is where it becomes, to me, philosophically very interesting, and also psychologically rather fascinating. There's a lovely book by Haruki Murakami where he's a Japanese novelist, very famous guy, and he wrote a little memoir book called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, or maybe it's What I Think About When I Think About Running. And he runs marathons every year. And now he's older, he's saying he's basically going slower and he can't run as far. And yet he carries on doing it. So there was a time, you know, in his first 10 years of running, he would try to go further and he would try and go faster. And I think this is, I mean, I said don't do it, and yet I think everybody, to some extent, regards the primary series as something they want to complete. Or if they've started the second series, most people have some goal in mind.
It helps to motivate.
Yeah,
doesn't
it can, and there's nothing wrong with some of those things being there. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make it competitive if just for me, I want to finish a particular series. But something he basically says is actually when it becomes really interesting is when you've gone beyond that plateau, and yet you're still finding all these rewards for doing it, and they're definitely there.
And what about when you're beginning? It can be a little bit overwhelming, can't it? All the technical detail about what to do in this posture, what to do in that posture, the breath,
Yeah.
Can we simplify it for
Sure.
those people that are in there, say, first
Sure.
6 months, first year?
Sure. So the way to simplify it is by making sure that you're relatively at ease. The relatively is a big relatively.
Yeah.
You're relatively at ease, and the measure of yourself being relatively at ease is that the breathing is relatively free. Okay, so your breath is moving, you're not holding the breath. That's the number one thing.
Okay.
Relatively easeful in the breath. The next thing is, with postural yoga, we need to look at the foundational aspects of what's on the ground. And once you've checked that and you've made sure that's in place, then I would just go to the basics of 6 directions. There's only 6 directions. So to simplify it, there's forward and back, left and right, up and down.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to know every single body part, but the major body parts, you need to know if one hand is going up and one hand is pressing down, or if one heel is pressing back while one knee goes forward. So as soon as you've got these opposing movements, we start to spread the body. And that's basically the definition of the word tantra. It's my understanding of tantra is it's tools for expansion, tools for spreading out. So it's starting with the physical body, which is why starting from having goals for the physical body to experience release or to get fitter, to have health benefits, those are probably the most common goals for people starting out. And as the body spreads, using these 6 directions, we experience some, benefit, both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, if you like. And then from that, it goes on. So I think the simplicity in the beginning is just at least understanding that if I've moved the head up, I've started to ground the thigh bones down. If I've moved the upper arms back, the chest has started to spread out wide. Or always taking a movement and a counter movement. You don't need to know very many, but you might need to know, having gone one way, you go the other. It's kind of as simple as that. If I'm pressing down in a press-up, there has to be some part of me that's actually having the response.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it's Newton's law or something, but everything.
Don't look at me.
Yeah. Okay. No, but it's every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah.
That's my
Sounds
sort of
familiar.
that's the bit that sounds familiar. But it's like the more I press down, the more it's going to go up.
Yeah.
And actually, once you get some tangible sense of that through postural yoga, then you find effortlessness. Then we find balance, and we find ease, and then from there, we just continue. Really, it ripples on.
Perhaps you could explain a little bit about as well these postures that we call sort of the gatekeepers, or they have other names for them. Because as a beginner, sometimes they can seem a little bit unfair, or I've got to Mary Chestnut D or whatever, and now I'm here, and now they won't let me go on, and it's like, why is he doing this to me, or whatever. So I know you're not flexible when it comes to those, but you have your own opinions of them. But generally,
for me, when beginners start, the thing I always really try and spend time on doing is some preliminaries, so some warm-up postures which are going to make, I think, practice accessible. Okay, so I don't always start beginners with sun salutation. Just lying down on your back, stretching the legs up like Supta Padangusthasana 1 with a strap or something. For me, for beginners, that really lets their back relax and lets them stretch the legs. And I really hope that they'll intuitively then, with a bit of guidance, start to see the relationship between the hamstrings and the spine. Then when we go into Surya Namaskar, they've had a bit of chance to actually kind of at least enter the space, get kind of settled, and then they can begin. And with sun salutation, I often ask beginners to wait doing sun salutation repetitively for several weeks. And then we start doing standing poses. And again, with beginners, I often leave beginners for a month of regular practice just working on the standing postures, because that's where, as I described the directions, they become very clear.
And you get some strength up.
Yeah, you get some strength up, and also they're more accessible because the pelvis is higher. You can move the hip joints, you can move the thigh joints, you can move the shoulders more easily. You can gain length in the waist and the spine. And I really view postural yoga as beginning mostly with the spine. How do we access this, awakening in the spine? So then, though, like you mentioned, the sort of classic gateway poses of Mary Chestnut D and stuff. For me, the reason we often ask people to stop there, and I do think there's immense benefit to actually stopping at a place as opposed to just ploughing on regardless, is it gives you opportunity really to let the practice almost ferment a while, and to let yourself actually be at a place where you stop. And actually, for me, I actually think that's very refreshing. Like I remember talking to, I think it was my kid's school teacher when he was just in like kindergarten, and she was saying, actually, you know, you don't want to say to your kid, hey, do you want to have pasta, or do you want to have noodles, or do you want to have, you know, cheese on toast today? It's like, actually, you just want to go, here's baked beans. You know what I mean? It's like, because actually having too much choice is overwhelming. And for me, one of the things that I think is actually very freeing in the Ashtanga method is you don't have a choice. You go through these poses in a sequence. Obviously, if you can't do the poses, you do some adaptation. But actually, it takes you away from this rather kind of, like I was saying, sort of capitalist mentality of, do I want it in blue, or do I want it in red, or do I want it in, do I tailor it to this, that, or the other? Actually, there's something very freeing, very liberating about having a practice where you go, well, I do this. That's the way it goes. You know, if there's some appropriate modification, like I say, it's fine. But actually, to stop there is very, very useful. Now, with something like Marichidi, I'll often adapt it for people. And after a certain amount of time, when you've seen that people have kind of maturely accepted where they get to with that place, just because they can't bind doesn't mean you have to leave them there forever.
Yeah.
However, for many students who've gone perhaps a little bit too far and a little bit too fast, when you go back to those poses that perhaps you need to work on, it really changes the way you work on them. You know, so in Ashtanga you typically practice up to wherever it is. It could be Marichidi, it could be a particular place in second series, Kapotasana is a big one. And actually by stopping and really giving that posture a full go, giving it your full attention, maybe trying it, you know, 3-5 times, and noticing, you know, I mean, the question I always ask students is, well, where's the resistance? You know, is the resistance something physical?
Yeah.
Is the resistance actually just psychological? Is there just a lot of fear there? Then how can you go about actually investigating, staying calm whilst going through that? Or at least, if going through that might not be the right phrase, at least just going up to the edge to peer at it, have a look. Because then it doesn't become so scary, you see. When you repeatedly look at this stuff that you're trying to hide from, you look at it and you go, actually, what was I so scared of? Generally,
Yeah.
you know. So I'm actually a big believer, or I'm a big advocate in stopping for some time at certain places. You know, I mean, my gate pose of Mula Bandhasana I've been stuck on for ages, not going anywhere near or past it. You know, it's like, okay, there's my barrier. I'm not going past. You know, that's fine. You know, but I remember, you know, first trip in Mysore years back, that gate pose for me was Karandavasana, and it was really helpful to spend 3 months stopped at that place. You know, I mean, I didn't perfect it in those 3 months, but I got a darn sight better at it than just whisking on past and, you know.
Yes, because sometimes you don't bother giving it the attention it needs, then do you?
Yeah, and I also think, I mean, we just recorded earlier the chant, you know, Puranamida, Puranamidam, Purana, which is this kind of beautiful explanation of how everything is actually complete. Everything is perfect. And actually, that idea is utterly profound. The idea that this is perfect, that this is complete, that I, right now, am perfect and complete, it's such a revolutionary idea. And if I hold that whilst I'm practicing, it changes the way I do everything. And it won't just be when I'm practicing. I mean, the analogy, I steal it from Satish Kumar, who is one of the old editors from a magazine called Resurgence, and he's quite an amazing guy, you know, sort of verging on sainthood really in my eyes. But he described it really beautifully in an analogy. He said it's like when I prepare the food, I'm just chopping and preparing the food. Hopefully, I'm not in that mindset of I'm starving hungry already. You know, I'm just there enjoying the activity of preparing it. When I'm cooking the food, it's the same thing. I'm cooking. I'm not actually rushing ahead. I'm not eating it as I cook. Just cook. And then later, as I eat the meal, I'm actually just enjoying maybe the company with friends, with family. I eat the meal. Then later, you know, we wash up. That activity of washing up in itself, you just do it and you find a kind of simplicity and joy in that activity. It's not, I'm doing the washing up because then we can use the plates again tomorrow. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Normally, we're always leaping ahead. So we're always thinking about the activity in terms of the fruition of the result. Actually, there is a way of doing any activity whereby you find that sense of completeness in that part that you're doing.
That particular activity itself.
Yeah, which is for me why I often use that chant so often. In fact, I use it daily before practice to go, hang on, if I'm doing Surya Namaskar, I'm doing Surya Namaskar, or whichever part of it, whichever breath I'm on. Because half the time, psychologically, I'm preparing. Should I practice this series today? Should I practice that series today? And then I'm in the midst of the series, and that gateway pose you're scared of, I'm doing Kranchasana, but my mind's not on Kranchasana. I've already got ahead to that fearful Kapotasana. I'm making something of it. And if we can come back to where we're actually at, then that will have a huge impact and change in the way we experience our lives, not just our practice, but that's the whole point of taking the practice, taking these quite profound teachings that are from the yoga tradition, and actually trying to absorb them into our lives.
Yeah.
You know, if and when we do that, and there are moments when we do it in our lives, you have this just profound feeling of peace, which in relation to beginners, actually is not that hard to get to. You know, if we do a small amount of activity of movement practice, where we connect to the breath, the movement, the physicality of movement, and then a bit like I said, there's one direction and another. Well, we've got movement and we've got stillness. So if in the beginning of practice we commit daily to doing some movement of the Ashtanga practice and some period of stillness, 10 minutes of Shavasana, because not everyone wants to do 20 minutes of sitting, then actually just contrasting the stillness, the movement, and noticing in the day there's movement, there's stillness in our activities, enjoying those pauses, that has profound implications for the quality of life and for that feeling of connection to everything around us. And that's my sort of.
And do you think it's worth beginners? I mean, you're taking on a lot to commit to a practice anyway. Do you think it's worth at the beginning also starting straight away with even a small amount of meditation or a small amount? I know we do the breath within the practice as a form of pranayama, but a more disciplined pranayama. What are your feelings about that for beginners?
My feeling for beginners is it's really useful to learn technique and to learn to drop the technique. So the first technique when people come to an Ashtanga class they often learn, and I often teach them as well, would be Ujjayi Pranayama, so how to breathe with sound.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, some people don't call it Ujjayi Pranayama. There's a big sort of splitting of hairs. Is it Ujjayi Pranayama? Is it just breathing with sound? Anyway, forget that dialogue. It's for another debate. But basically, to breathe with the technique of sound, but then also to drop the technique. So I often would start people reclining or sitting up if they're comfortable with it, but you can't focus too much on the breath, or you can't focus too much and become too absorbed in anything if the body's distracting you. You know, the idea is, if the body's your vehicle, you park the vehicle, you don't worry about it. So I park my car. If it's in the centre of town, I put money on the meter. Hopefully I don't fret about it as I go about the activities I'm doing. So it's the same with the body. In sitting meditation, I want to park my body and almost let the body go, so that I can go inward, be that on the vehicle of the breath or the mantra or whatever visualization might be used as the object of meditation. But I mean, to cut a long story short, for those who have the inclination, do sitting meditation. For those who don't have the inclination, it's not something that has to be done. What Pattabhi Jois and what Guruji always was saying to people is, you know, the inclination will come later. For me, once people have tasted and had a direct experience of contrast between movement and stillness, I believe people will, once they're tuned into themselves, naturally choose when to be more still and when to move more. In my own life, when I've sort of gone through relatively traumatic things like sort of divorce and almost mental breakdown in that process, there was a natural inclination to choose stillness. At those times of crisis, and I would just sit.
Yeah.
Because if I was doing postural practice, I was so agitated. Bear in mind, of course, sometimes you're so agitated you don't sleep. You know, you work yourself into a state. You know, and actually, I think the natural inclination to choose stillness, that could be lying down, relaxing. But for me, from my practice, I choose to sit still. I do think that's something that will come naturally. I mean, you see it with your pets or your dogs, your animals. You know, it's like there's the time they choose, they're ill, they don't eat, they sleep, they lie down.
Yeah.
Then there's another time they're running around and playing. You know, for me, doing Ashtanga practice, primary series, whatever it is, it's like running around and playing. There's a playful, joyful quality, and it's fun. But there is a time when you naturally choose to balance those two things. I mean, you mentioned that kind of initial enthusiasm. I see students all the time in the first couple of years, they never want to sit still. They always want to do more. When I try and teach restorative tapasana and stillness meditation, I can see they have an agitation, a slight kind of resistance to it. And what I find is all the students that stick with it, that resistance tends to drop away. They might still talk about their they're obstacles that come up, in sitting meditation practice or in postural practice, and yet actually they're much more willing to work with those to sort of have a look in the back of the closet there or what it is. And I think that's actually why the resistance is there, because you sit still, and it's been waiting for you. The mind is there, the emotions are there. You can't not see it sooner or later. What it is that's becoming your psychological, emotional, physical makeup, so to speak.
So I think we've got time for just a few last words about, recommendations, beginner-wise.
Yeah.
Anything else that springs to mind as a? I think we've done most, haven't we?
I think it's great to, based on some of what we've just done, grab yourself a notepad and pen if you're a beginner.
The journal.
Ask yourself, what are my motivations for practice? Don't censor yourself. There's no right or wrong answer. You can practice for any reason. So write those down, put the little date there, keep practicing, and have a look, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year later at the journal. If you're not practicing, maybe you'll remember there was a good reason, you'll start again.
Yeah, if you leave the book on the top, then maybe it'll jog your mind. Oh, yeah, I'm meant to be writing
Maybe, yeah. The other thing is, if you've got notice boards in your house, stick something up there on the notice board that's perhaps your little intention to go. Or the other thing, share goals. If you've got goals that you've got, like, I'm going to start practicing yoga 3 times a week, whatever it is, share that with your family and friends, because sometimes they'll go, "Oi, you're still not doing that thing." But sometimes when you've actually written it down, or sometimes when you've actually shared it with friends, sometimes that pressure, which isn't ideal, sometimes that's a motivation to keep going. So that might be a useful sort of jog to get you going. Other than that, just enjoy it.
Enjoy. I think that's the main thing, isn't it? Enjoy it. Don't beat yourself up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Keep the enthusiasm.
Thanks so much, Joey.
Thanks, Stu.
Hope that helped. Just a little bit to get you going. And of course, there's going to be loads more coming out this season very soon, and loads more with Joey too. So I hope that was good.